how did you be depressed? How were you depressed for 13 years, and like what turned it around for you? Now, I don't know if that's a short conversation or a long conversation. If that's something you can like touch on for a few minutes, I think that would be fantastic. But then I do
Okay,
have a couple of other things that I'd like to share with you.
sure. If you want to know how I got out of my depression, I think it was a lot of things, a lot of steps, but if I were to put it as quickly as I could, it would be in the beginnings of my life, I didn't know I deserved respect. I excused the behavior of the people around me by explaining it away. And that was important to me because I took it less personally when I understood it. It's not because of me, it's because of their upbringing, it's because of their issues, it's because of their this. And understanding psychology and researching the way that people respond to trauma helped me to feel less flawed and deserving of the aggression and mistreatment that I endured when I was younger. And that helped me until it started becoming an excuse to allow abuse. What I didn't then process until much later was that it's okay to expect respect. I didn't even know what that looked like. I didn't know what it felt like to be cared about and prioritized and loved. And so I ended up in a situation of really extreme domestic violence, and I was drinking to cope with it every day. Weirdly, I thought I maybe was an alcoholic or something, but then as soon as I moved out, I didn't drink. Like I didn't even notice that I didn't pick up
Hmm.
anything. Um, and um, from there, I still had a lot of ways to go, but I was starting to build a better and more beautiful environment where I could thrive and discover who I was. And then I had a lot of time throughout that whole situation to sit and listen to myself. So as soon as I had like a tiny little inch of movement to be free to do what I want instead of what other people wanted me to do for them, because I'd basically grown up being a servant in a lot of ways. Um, I didn't know what it was to
Has
have
that
reciprocal.
changed?
I don't know yet,
Okay.
but I am happier. um, but yeah, like I started to notice all of these things, so I started building a better environment. I was offered antidepressants, especially after a suicide attempt. I didn't survive because I failed. I survived because someone busted the door down and intervened. And so I didn't exactly feel grateful to live. It wasn't a second thought thing. It wasn't a choice. It was a, oh, I didn't succeed kind of situation. And I in that situation I needed to get out. I needed to fix my environment. And when they offered me antidepressants, I was like, I don't feel like this is a problem with my neurochemistry. I feel like this is a problem with my surroundings, and I'd like to change those first. So I went running to help with the neurochemical side of things, and I started fixing my life and getting to safety. And when I did, I started to expand into that little bit of extra freedom. And um, yeah, from there, I guess the next part was just thinking about the philosophical part of it and why I should want to live. I needed to have a reason. So I started thinking about what mattered to me and what was beautiful about life. And that's where the kind of like universe kind of theory stuff came from. And that helped me to have like a little bit of a foundation and a backbone. And then the next part was, what will I be glad I did a year from now? Like if I look back a year from now in the future me, what will I be glad I did? And what will I regret wasting time on? And I started prioritizing according to the stuff that would consistently make me satisfied long term. And when I started imagining a life in the future where I was happy, it had animals, it had stability, it had safety, and all these sorts of things. So just by being like picturing myself happy, I knew the direction I had to go in. And I built all those things. I'm safe now, and I'm happy, and I have animals, and I have computer games, breakfast. I have all of the things that allow me to thrive and have choices. And another thing, I think the final thing is to stop trying to manipulate the world to be what I want it to be. I don't
Hmm.
have goals and plans anymore. I go with the flow. I take what the universe hands me. I take what chaos throws at my feet and I build the best of it. There are people who get handed shit in life and they cry because they've got shit on their hands. And there are people who make it into bricks and build fucking houses. And I want to be the second kind. I want to be the kind of person who could be handed anything and see it as an opportunity. Since then, I've been incredibly happy and surprised by all the beauty that's come my way.
Okay. Beautiful, Anita. So, can I highlight a couple of things that I heard there?
No, get out. Yeah, go for it.
Um, So the first is that, like, I think it starts with listening to yourself, right? So I think that this is something that people need to understand, is that we're taught, and this kind of goes back to the idea that people with privilege can't suffer, and that people who are in lack privilege can't be happy. And I think that the interesting thing is that, like, a lot of times when I work with people, they assume that a particular thing is going to bring them happiness. And the interesting thing is that since they don't have it, like a good example is, like, let's say there's a
Purchase.
guy who's never had so I used to be this way, where, like, I had never really had a serious and loving relationship, and I thought what I needed to be happy was a serious and loving relationship. And the interesting thing, though, is that that's not something that comes from me. That's something that comes from watching other people. So it's not actually listening to myself. It's making assumptions about what the road to happiness looks like based on what I see outside of myself. Because if you think that being a millionaire is going to make you happy, and you aren't a millionaire, then, like, you're not basing that on yourself. You're basing it on the outside world.
Yeah.
And I and we'll get to, I mean, I do think a loving relationship goes a long way, and we'll get to that in a second. But the first thing is that I was listening to your story, and it sort of started with listening to yourself. It started with getting a little bit of space and listening to that voice inside you and following that direction, even in the smallest way. And then you got a little bit more space, you listen to it more, and so on and so forth. Um, I think you also mentioned something like, about the power of environment and the people around you. I think so many people do not understand how much of the way they feel has so much to do with things that are given around them. Like, if you live in a toxic home with abusive parents and you think that there's no way that you're going to be better, and we get this a lot, that Dr. K is the only one that can save you, you would be surprised how little Dr. K matters compared to, like, getting the fuck out of, like, your current living situation with abusive people. It can be like night and day. There are so many things about the environment, the soil that you put yourself in, and, like, the air that you put yourself in, and the sunlight that you put yourself in, and the water that you put yourself in, that will allow you to grow into a different person.
Yeah.
And so I think that you were able to really make a couple of serious steps forward that were sort of like mental, like, in a sense, mental health related. It sounds like you were in a dangerous and traumatic relationship, which you got the fuck out of. It also sounds like you saw a trauma therapist who helped you kind of work through these things, which is awesome. And then somewhere along the way, you started to, like, channel this, like, universe, Buddha, Eastern, Western, whatever, like this sort of truth about take what is given to you, start to appreciate life, and all this shit that everyone wants to learn how to do, but no one knows how do you learn how to do that. And I think the really grateful thing, I'm grateful to you, Anita, because you've given us, like, the story of, like, how that happens. And I think there were a couple of key things about basically listening to yourself, changing a couple of circumstances, really, like, thinking about the way that you see the world. There's a lot of self-reflection and growth as opposed to a playbook that you follow. And I think, unfortunately, that's what I've found, is that, like, everyone has to walk this journey on their own. There's no one can give these answers to you. You have to figure them out yourself.
Mhm.
But we can sort of get a guidebook as to how to figure them out yourself, which
Yeah.
starts with things like listening to yourself.
Mm.
Okay. Thoughts, questions? Can I move on to part two?